My good wife Gayatri and I have recently returned from Belgrade in Serbia. It's the first time I've been in Belgrade since the war launched by Tony Blair and Bill Clinton to complete the breakup of Yugoslavia in 1999. We found it a fascinating remnant of a once great country. Yugoslavia was a success story. It was a popular, for a long time, socialist country, innovative and attractive, and one which attracted holidaymakers even from all over the West. Yugoslavia was socialism in different colours from traditionally seen. Yugoslavia was a unity of 5 peoples, and those 5 peoples were encouraged, no pushed, over decades to splinter and break up. The BBC in London at Bush House had no less than 4 language stations beaming exclusively into Yugoslavia, seeking to arouse the serpents of sectarianism and separatism to break up this successful country, whose leader, Tito, was amongst the greatest of all the socialist leaders. An anti-fascist commander in Spain in the Civil War, 1936 to 1939, the leader of the partisans in Yugoslavia, who liberated themselves from Nazi occupation and throughout the war tied down multiple divisions of the Nazi Wehrmacht, and the builder of a type of socialism which stood the test of time, at least while he was alive. Tito was a Croat, and he was leading the state of Yugoslavia from Belgrade, the capital now of Serbia. We visited his grave, a very tasteful and powerful monument to what once was. But there's no point in crying over spilt milk. Yugoslavia is gone, perchance for good. But what I'm here to talk to you about, and the video you're about to see will show what happened the last time NATO got involved in a war in Europe. Teenage scribblers, and many of them far older than teenage scribblers, routinely describe NATO as a defensive alliance. They frequently say that NATO has kept the peace in Europe since the end of the Second World War. But you can only believe that if you have forgotten the nearly 3 months that NATO bombers bombarded a European capital, the great and ancient city of Belgrade, the ruins of which can still be seen by visitors, of whom there are, alas, comparatively few, and by the citizens of Belgrade on a daily basis. We routinely hear, in relation to the Ukraine, that the borders of a European country cannot be altered by force. But you can only believe that to be true if you've never heard of Kosovo. Kosovo was and is legally a part of Serbia. The other Yugoslav republics seceded, as they had the right to do in a federal state. But Kosovo was not a state. It was and is a part of Serbia, a sacred part at that for the believers in Orthodox Christianity, the very clear majority of the people of Serbia. Kosovo was forcibly seized by NATO, who dismembered Serbia. Not content with breaking up and destroying Yugoslavia, they then destroyed Serbia, the last remaining part of Yugoslavia. There would be nothing called Kosovo if it was not an armed NATO encampment. It has no resources. It has exported a massive proportion of its population as immigrant workers elsewhere in the European continent, as well as most of the guns that turn up in crime in the European continent, most of the drugs that turn up in the European continent, and most, alas, of the prostitutes who end up on the European continent. Kosovo has been reduced to sink status because the Western powers that created it have no interest in it except as a means of breaking up Serbia and besieging what remains of Yugoslavia. They don't care about Kosovo. They don't care about Albanian people. They cared only, for lots of reasons, about keeping the Serbian people, if not in their camp, then simply unable to do anything vis-à-vis Russia, for example, that their camp did not approve of. The Serbian people are particularly close to the Russian people. We attended the Cup semi-final, won 8-0 by Red Star Belgrade, and all the flags amongst the crowd, amongst the ultras, were Russian flags, chants of Russia. Smoke pillars of red, white and blue were constantly arising from the crowd. Russia's very popular in Serbia for religious reasons, but also for historical reasons. The Yugoslav partisans were fighting alongside Russia, and indeed alongside Britain and America, against the Nazi occupation of their country. That's all been forgotten about by Britain and the United States, that don't even invite the Russians to the victory celebrations. Germany is more welcome at World War II victory commemorations now than the Red Army, which did far, far more than anybody else, everybody else put together, to bring about that defeat of Nazi Germany. But the people of Serbia have never forgotten that wartime alliance. They haven't forgotten that Russia refuses to recognize the forced unilateral independence of Kosovo. But here's the rub. Almost everyone else has recognized it. A state was forcibly torn from its own motherland and unilaterally recognized by the football authorities, by the Eurasian Song Contest, by international fora, and by the big powers in the West, by the British, the United States, the French, the Germans, and so on. Which begs one final question. If Kosovo can be taken by force and created into statehood without the agreement of the people whose land it forms part of, why cannot the Crimea? Why cannot the Donbass? Why cannot Mariupol? Why cannot the entire eastern part of the Ukraine? If it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. If it's good for Kosovo, it's good for the Ukraine. Take a look at this video. They were partying like it was 1999. In fact, it was in 1999 when peaceful NATO were partying here in a European capital, the city of Belgrade. They tell you that NATO is a defensive organization. Tell that to the people of former Yugoslavia. Tell that to the people of Belgrade. For almost 3 months, they were bombing and killing here in the heart of Europe. NATO is, as it has always been, a front for the American empire. If you're supporting it, you're acting against the interests of the people of Europe. You're acting in the interests of the continuing domination of the globe by the United States of America. They even bombed the Chinese embassy here in 1999. They silenced a television station, not by ordnance, but yes, by ordnance of the exploding kind. They killed 16 employees of the state radio and television, the equivalent of the BBC in Belgrade, including makeup ladies and tea ladies. They did so in order to complete the destruction and the dismemberment of the former socialist republic of Yugoslavia. Nobody much said or did anything against it, in Britain or in Europe as a whole. Myself, in Parliament, it's a period of which I'm inordinately proud. Under the leadership of the late Mr. Benn, Tony Benn, the greatest Prime Minister we never had, we fought a rearguard action in Parliament against the destruction of Yugoslavia. We failed, like we failed again just a few years later in Iraq. But the world has changed. Nobody can bomb a Chinese embassy now. Nobody can stand up to the new Eurasian development which is taking place on this planet, where most of the people and most of the wealth of the planet resides. We're in a new world. It's just not the new world order that the so-called West, which is, I remind you, just 10% of the world's population, think or thought that it was going to be. Their new world order has been stillborn. A better world order, a more just world order, is in the process of being born. But these are useful reminders of just exactly the nature of the beast that is NATO. We're here in Belgrade and we can say these things without fear of seizure of our assets, without fear of imprisonment. 7 years in prison. If I was to say what I've just said through the mediums that would reach a large number of people, I could end up next door to Julian Assange. Just think.